So we're just going to kind of dig in. There's going to be times I'm going to ask you guys to stand up and actually come look. Because as you see, I have a lot of wildlife items up here. It's going to be really hard to pick all these up and show you all, so I'd rather just have you guys come up here. Feel free to take pictures individually. I will talk about some of the items and then kind of let you guys come up to each table. So we're going to go ahead and start with mammals. All right. So specifically, foxes. Do you guys know what foxes that we have in the state are? We have two. Yeah, we've got the red and the gray. A lot of times, so these are the items I'm going to be using on an Envirothon test specifically. So I'm not going to just switch out a fur. So if you have a gray fox fur on the test, it will be this one. If there's a red fox fur on the test, it will be this one. I'm not going to bring a brand new red fox pelt to it. Because this one looks like it has a ringlet tail. It doesn't actually. Whoever tanned it skinned and split down the middle of the tail, so it likes to curl. And if you straighten it out, you can actually see it's kind of a black stripe down the middle of the tail with a black tip. Whenever I let go, it likes to curl. So everyone always, when I bring it out, actually says, oh, it's a raccoon. So make sure you have your kids look. Now that is like middle school, elementary school that do that, and it obviously doesn't have the banded eyes, but make sure that you guys are having your kids pay attention to everything. Sometimes things aren't exactly what they seem, because not everything wildlife is textbook. You'll find out a lot with tracks. Snow is a great thing to find a track in. You can kind of get the full version, but when you start adding mud and sand, sometimes they squish sideways. Sometimes it might stumble or something, and it might have a weird deformed look to it. So you want to make sure that you guys are also studying actual real life tracks as well, which you can find the textbook one in your little booklet that's in your tub. So study those as well. I will use scans of some as well, so keep that in mind. So the red fox is actually going to feel like thicker. It has a thick undercoat, and this is actually the winter coat for him, so it has a thick undercoat, and you guys can kind of see the short, fuzzier little hairs there. That's his undercoat, and then this is going to be the top coat. The top coat's repellent. There is a size difference between the two as well. The red fox is going to be about 30 pounds, and the gray fox is going to be about 15 pounds, so there is a size difference. Both are in the canine family, and the gray fox is the only canine that can climb trees. So this means that foxes are more closely related to dogs, like your average everyday dog, than your house cat. So keep that in mind as well. A good thing to look at really quick while we're on the topic of foxes is going to be their skull. So we've got a gray fox skull and our red fox skull. You can kind of see there's a slight size difference between the two. Red fox is a little bit bigger, and that's because they are just bigger in general. But one of the key indicators, if you just found the skull in the woods, is going to be the shape on the top of their skull. You can kind of see a V shape here. This is the red fox skull, and it's going to have that V. Gray fox is going to have that U shape. Okay? All right. Now we get to be a little bit interactive. Okay? I work with kids, so I like being interactive. All right. So what was this? Red fox, right? Okay. What was this? Red. I always get black fox. And that would make sense, right? Because you got red fox that's red, you got gray fox that's gray. It makes sense that this was named the black fox, but it's a red fox. Why?
Because of the melanin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a melanistic color morph, okay? Red foxes are always going to have that white tip tail, though, and that's the tall tail sign. No one laughed at me. Okay. The white tip tail right there gives them away. It's a melanistic color morph. They come in different colors. Black bear will come in different colors. Lots of species will come in different colors. Albinoism is not a melanistic color morph. It's a genetic disease. It can be found in all species. However, not everything has a melanistic color morph. This is based on genetics, so it's the same reason we have different color hair, eyes, skin, all that. This is the other one I always trick people with. What's this one? It's a red fox as well. It's got that white tip tail. Every time I always trick the kids with them, they always say gray fox because they think I'm tricking them again. It's still just a red fox. These do have nicknames though. This one's nicknamed the silver fox, and this is nicknamed the cross fox. So if I ever bring these two foxes up, it'll just be to concern the melanistic color morphs concerning that. And obviously, we don't have any of these melanistic color morphs in West Virginia, but this is just kind of a good example of it. The cinnamon bear is also a melanistic color morph of the black bear. There are more. The black bear has more melanistic color morphs than any other large mammal. We learned it in science class. Yeah, this is a Punnett square. I might have a simple one of these that they have to fill out. That just kind of, it'll give all the information that they need, but they'll just kind of have to know how to fill it out. So if I have small g up here and big G, little g here, they'll just have to fill it out and maybe give some percentages. So keep that in mind, have them study Punnett squares this year. So, also another thing is adaptations. Kind of study a little bit about adaptations. Sometimes they're just really simple. They're going to be, like for this fox up here, eyes, independent, swiveling ears. So like, if I'm looking at you and I hear something this way, I could turn just one of them. That is an adaptation. Red foxes actually have long legs and a small stomach, so they can run up to 30 miles an hour. That's also an adaptation he's got. Eyesight, nose. I'll actually pick back out one of these skulls and talk about another adaptation between felines and dogs. Okay. So who thinks what has a better sense of smell?
The fox.
Yeah, the fox. So even though the mountain lion has a bigger skull, if we kind of line up where the nasal passage starts, there, the nasal passage starts, you can see that the fox actually has a longer nasal passage. This is a key to kind of telling what has a stronger sense of smell. Felines actually have a really poor sense of smell compared to canines. Canines have a really good sense of smell, but once you start getting into modern day breeding, like pugs, have you guys heard a pug breathe sometimes? It's heavy and mucusy. That's because they've been bred for that short nose, and they're not supposed to have that genetically, because all dogs actually came from gray wolves. They're supposed to have that long snout, but they've been bred over the years to have that short snout, and it's caused a lot of breathing problems. So there are some exceptions with canines have a better sense of smell than some felines, but that's just because of selective breeding. Okay, so let's move on to antlers and horns. All right. What are these? Well, these are horns. All right. Here in West Virginia, it's extremely common for these to be called deer horns, but there are a difference, okay? I kind of talked about this last year a little bit, but I'm going to go over it again just because I've added some new materials, okay? This is actually a bull horn, okay? This is an American bison or buffalo horn, okay? Once an animal loses their horn, it won't grow back, okay? Animals that have antlers will shed them every single year, okay? So March and April, they'll fall off and immediately start regrowing new ones. They go into a velvet stage. This velvet stage is going to be warm, fuzzy, pretty soft. It's warm because blood vessels are actually going through that velvet across the antler. It kind of acts as its own personal air conditioning for the deer because that blood is traveling through the body and it goes to the head and around that antler. That antler provides a soft velvet material and it's thin. So that blood actually gets cooled down as it goes throughout the antler and then comes back to the body. So it has that all summer in the fall time, that velvet is going to start shedding. It's around August, September, it's going to start shedding. Then you're going to get your standard fox look, okay? So that's this. I keep feeling like I have to pose for you.
You're good.
So these antlers up here are actually going to be elk antlers. This is also a new addition. So these are quite heavy, and you guys can come up and feel these here in a minute. So whitetail antlers are going to grow up to about a 1/4 inch a day. Elk antlers will grow up to 1 inch a day, and just for a fun fact, moose will grow up to 1 pound a day of antler, even though we don't have moose. Please know that. And they are heavy. Alright. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about furs next and just some of the common missed ones. So these two are the ones that get confused a lot just because this tail curls. It kind of looks like that raccoon tail. This is the gray fox, and this is a raccoon. You can tell because the band around that eye, and they're about the same length. The legs will be a little longer on the gray fox, but those are the differences that you guys can kind of see and visualize between the two. So these are going to be the furs I'm using. Another one, ooh, when I have them in front of you, you guys can kind of tell. Some people will call this the gray fox. This is a coyote, or some people will call this the coyote. This is kind of the size difference you can see between the two. So even though they are kind of similar in color and pattern, you can kind of see that the coyote is much, much larger. Okay. All right. What is this? No, it's not a beaver.
Groundhog?
We're kind of getting closer. This is a mink. Lots of people say river otter with this one, so I like to bring this one out. But I like to bring this one out first because this is actually a river otter. People don't realize how large they actually are. I'll bring this one around here in a second. Right after I show off this bad boy. You guys know what this is? Beaver, yes, this is a beaver. Lots of people tell me bear. It's a bear cub. It is not a bear cub. Bear cubs are rather large. Sometimes I even kind of have to give them some shape, and people are like, oh, that's definitely not a bear. So I'll bring these two around. You guys can kind of feel that the fur actually has a waxy texture to it. This is because their skin produces an oil that helps that water resistance even more and will help that water just slide off. So it kind of has like a waxy feel to it.
It's very oval.
Yes, it is very oval. And he does not have a tail. Tails are hard to taxidermy. Usually most taxidermists actually use replicas just because it's so hard to taxidermy a tail. So this is the beaver fur I would be using. All right, we're going to start talking a little bit about controversies. The more rural you get, the more of a controversy it is. A lot of people will call these mountain lions. So we're going to get into the mountain lion debate. This is a bobcat. You can tell because it has the spots down the stomach, okay? And it has the bobbed tail, okay? That's where they get their name. That's a key indicator for a bobcat. A lot of times people see these on game cams and actually think they're mountain lions. It's hard to tell size, but these little guys are not very big, okay? They're going to be maybe this tall, this long. Mountain lions will, from tip of the tail to the head, will probably be about this long with the tail. The tail runs the length, is about the length of the body. I'd say 3-foot tail. You think that's right? 3-foot tail? Lewis and Clark? Yeah. Lewis and Clark are our mountain lions at the Wildlife Center. Aaron, who's going to be talking to you about fish later, he works at French Creek where our Wildlife Center is located, so he sees them a lot. But they're going to have about a 3-foot tail. They're not going to have spots on them. They're going to be a solid collar, maybe a white belly, but it's not going to have any types of spots on it. The reason I like to get into this conversation is we educate the public. Lots of people will tell you that there are black panthers here in West Virginia. Most DNR people will just kind of whatever you want to believe, but I am a true born educator and I like to educate. So the only large felines that we have in the world that have a black melanistic color are going to be the leopard and the jaguar. Okay, we don't have any leopards or jaguars in the United States. There have been some reported cases of jaguars, I believe, coming in all along the border of Mexico, but none of those are going to come all the way here. We do have Lewis, who is a very dark mountain lion. He's kind of a dark gray, but we don't have any pure black mountain lions here in the state. It's just not a color they come in. It's not a melanistic color morph like we were talking about earlier. However, the closest established populations that we've had with mountain lions are going to be South Dakota and Florida, okay? Now, they love to travel, okay? They'll travel 200-300 miles a day easily. When they're a year old, they get kicked out or they go explore their own territory, try to find two things to have an established population: women and food. We've got the food. We have tons of deer. We don't have the women. So we don't have an established population. So I always say it's not impossible for a mountain lion to come through the states. There have been some reported, proven cases, and I'm not talking about game cam footage with the palm tree in the background. There have been true designated on the East Coast. Yes, this was definitely a mountain lion. Most of the time though, they'll head back because there's no women and they have an instinct to just establish a population to reproduce. We've got the food but no women, so no permanent established population of mountain lions. So that's my little spiel on the whole mountain lion case. Alright, so now I'm going to talk very, very briefly. When you get over here to this table, there is a pamphlet of our reptile and amphibian regs. They're new, okay? So we just passed, I think there's a new section in here. I don't see a new one, but I'm going to tell you. So our new law is that you cannot own a native species here in West Virginia. So you can't own a box turtle, you can't own any type of native species that you'd find. Not a rat snake, not anything like that. Once you, so Petco and all of that have had to stop selling anything that's native to here in West Virginia. The reason for this is sometimes kids will pick them up, keep them for a year, it'll starve, they'll re-release it somewhere else. Transfer disease. Also, there's a lot of people that will actually hoard native reptiles and amphibians. We've had to deal with a lot of people like that, but we are not going to kick down some little kid's door for having one box turtle. I always say that and kids are like, what about my box turtle I've had for like 5 years? And I'm like, I didn't hear it, it's okay. We're not going to take it away. Now we're going to have Aaron Yeager come up and start discussing fish.
So are you guys familiar with fish? So fish are cold-blooded. They're actually called poikilotherms is the fancy word for you are the same temperature as your environment. But we have about 100 and I want to say 80, there's probably actually closer to 190 different species of fish in West Virginia. Fins are what makes the fish go, and this is looks like a red horse sucker. But the fins, they all have names, and some of them are paired. They're called pectoral fins. These are called pelvic fins, and there are two. They're just for stabilization in the water column. And then most fish have at least one dorsal fin. Some have up to 3 in saltwater fish. And this would be the dorsal fin. This one back here is called the anal fin because it's very close to the anus where everything happens. And this is the tail fin is called the caudal fin. So those are some of the major fins you need to be aware of. But there are also some fish that have an extra fin. Any of you know what that little extra fin is called, like on a trout?
The adipose.
Adipose fin. Let's see, those are Sunfish. Here we go. Catfish, trout. There's a little fish called a trout perch that we have in West Virginia that has an adipose fin, but that is your little fatty adipose fin. If you guys want to get into any of the specific fish that are in here, we can do that too if you want to learn specific fish. But I think you had mainly narrowed down the families on there.
We didn't get too specific.
Right. So they're even on the jar. Ictaluridae is the catfish family.
And we don't do scientific names.
Make it easy. Nice. So just staying on the fins topic, some fish. Man, I'm not gonna be able to get these out. Any forceps or anything?
No, I didn't.
The reason I'm wearing gloves is because most of these fish are preserved in formaldehyde. And no matter how many times you clean it and wash it and then switch it to alcohol, there's still some formaldehyde on it. Types of fins. And there are soft rayed fins, which suckers have. Suckers, minnows, and there are what's called spiny fins. And you can feel that these have very sharp and rigid spines. And the spines are thought to be an advanced character for fish, because like this fish is more evolutionary advanced than this one, just because it's got some protection. It can protect itself. Predatory fish love to eat soft rayed fin fish because they're easy to go down. These guys not so much. So there's one major difference. This is a rock bass, by the way. Yeah, we've got, when you're looking at sunfish, you're always looking at that roundish body shape. But the identifying characters for sunfish are on their ear tab, which is that little part of their gill flap. It's called the preopercle right there. They've got a spot. Some of them have different types of edges around that spot, and that is how we ID sunfish. This one, you can see it's got a longer ear tab with a little white margin around the edge of it. And you're gonna have to get into several different species of sunfish to teach you them all, but that is one of the major things you're gonna look for when you're IDing sunfish. I can get you like a checklist of that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. So fish hear, see, smell. They smell through these two little nares, called nares or nostrils or nares, and they actually hear and feel through this lateral line system. You can see that line. It runs down the center, the ventral center of every fish. And anything that hits the water makes a disturbance. Sounds travel 500 times faster in water or something to that effect. So they actually feel it through that lateral line system. It goes into their brain through that. That's how they can react. And smell. They can smell through those nares. What else is interesting about fish? A fish's gills are very interesting. The way they exchange, here's some trout. The way they exchange oxygen is very interesting. The water flows through the mouth and then out the gills, but their blood actually flows in the opposite direction when you're concerning the gills. So it's a countercurrent flow. So the blood's affinity for oxygen is greatest at the back of the gill, where water has already been deprived of oxygen from the front of the gill. So it actually kind of maximizes their efficiency when they're trying to breathe. Countercurrent deal.
Will you explain the difference between cold water and warm water fish and the hatcheries that we have?
So the difference between cold and cold and warm is kind of vague. Trout, cold water, we think of typically things that live in streams that never get above 70. Lethal temperature for brook trout I think is like 78, so if it gets that warm they're done. And a lot of our warm water fish, like these sunfish, their lethal temperatures are in the 90s probably, so they can withstand a lot more. But we have different types of hatcheries to raise different types of fish, and of course your trout hatcheries need to be spring fed or river fed, and with our warm water hatcheries they're basically just ponds. We will collect eggs and things from wild broodstock fish and just take the eggs to the hatchery, hatch the eggs, grow the fry out into ponds, and then we'll stock them out on a month or so after that. That's really the only major difference. I mean, we have probably more warm water fishing opportunities in the state than we do cold, but everybody loves their trout, so that's kind of. And we've gotten really good at raising trout, so I don't think that's ever going to stop.
Do you know much about the golden centennial trout specifically? I have asked questions about that.
It goes back to what you were saying about the melanism and the albinism. That our rainbow is a golden rainbow. That's just a genetic mutant, and when you start to learn about those Punnett squares, you'll see about how that recessive gene can be passed on and selected for, and it's turned out to be quite the marketing tool for us with the gold rush idea. But it's basically just a mutant rainbow trout that doesn't bite as well as the normal rainbow trout, and they're harder to catch. So I guess that adds to some of the allure. There's several species of minnows in there. Minnow family is probably our largest family. The most interesting, in my opinion, and colorful are the darters.
I was going to ask if you had any candy darters in there.
I doubt if we have any candy darters in here, but we do have the candy darter's closest relative and arch nemesis. That's a variegated darter, and you can tell by these guys just by looking at their fins kind of where they live within the stream. And most darters don't have much of a swim bladder. This gas bladder that actually helps them regulate their buoyancy. Sunfish and everything else, they use their gas bladder quite a bit. These guys just kind of hang out on the bottom, and a big male like this would be in some of the fastest chutes of riffles in the stream, and that's what these giant pec fins and these, this second dorsal and anal fin. I mean, this guy's got a lot of thrust when he wants to move around, and he needs it because he's living in the fastest part of the stream. The variegated darter looks much like the candy darter, and you can only blame fishermen for moving them where they don't belong, but they are hybridizing with the candy and basically out-competing them. They have one good stronghold above Summersville Lake where there's still pure candy darters, but it only takes one person to go fishing with the wrong bait. So if you teach your kids one thing, teach them not to move fish from where they belong. And if they insist on catching their bait, try to get them to use that bait within the same watershed that they collected it. And never dump out your unused bait. That's a good thing to try to beat into their heads.
And never put goldfish in a pond or anything. It kills.
Shouldn't move fish at all, especially if you don't really know what you're moving. But there are like 43 different species of darter. This is a green side darter. They have these U's and W's on their side, and there's 100 different little characters I could teach you if we had the time to go through all of that. But I think we're going to try to keep it general for these young folks. So minnows, there's really not a whole lot special about minnows. They're one of the least advanced fish, but probably the highest in number of species that we have. And a lot of those are your shiners, chubs. There's a central stone roller in there. They're kind of neat. They're kind of our algae eater in West Virginia. They have a cartilaginous ridge on their lower jaw that they can scrape stuff off the rocks with. It makes them kind of unique in that. The other ones are, mainly just forage fish that all the game fish rely on. Another interesting one from trout stream is a sculpin. And now these are more of a cold water fish. You can tell, like the darter, they're kind of built for hanging out in a riffle, and they have these big pec fins and a flattened head. They don't have scales like a catfish. Catfish don't have scales. Another thing I saw on one of the handouts was talking about how we age fish with scales, and you can pull a scale, put it under the microscope and count the rings just like a tree, but mainly there are bones inside their head called otoliths, and you kind of pop their head back, and right inside, down inside there, you can pull these two little bones out that are much more accurate to age with. And we section those bones, look at them under the scope, and you can just count the lines.
What's the most common research study that you do as a fish biologist?
The most common thing for a warm water fish guy like me to look at is simply like age and growth type things, and I work in our reservoirs a lot, so if you don't understand how old your fish are when they're at a certain age, then you can't set a regulation based on how they actually grow and live in the environment. So we have to kill them to age them, and sometimes that's just necessary in science. I wouldn't want to sugarcoat that a bit, because that's the way it goes. There are alternate methods to age fish. You can clip dorsal spines and section them, and sometimes, if the fish is under 8 years old or so, you can read it fairly clearly. But once they get older, and they do, it just gets really tough. And pretty
How
much.
old typically do fish live for in the rivers?
Fish have what's called indeterminate growth, so they grow for as long as they're alive, and they really have no set limit. But
Really?
the oldest walleye, for instance, that I've aged has been 17 years old from Somersville Lake. You think about a 30-inch walleye as a trophy fish, and you compare that to a buck. And guys are hunting and they're killing a 3 or 4 year old buck. I mean, what's the greater trophy? 20-year-old fish or 3-year-old deer? We don't think of fish the same terms. Fish is just a fish. Oh, here's another one. Here's one of our most primitive fish. These are lamprey. Which one do we have in here? No. So lamprey are one of our most primitive fish. They're cartilaginous, don't have spine, and they have this sucking disc. And they typically only get that when they are adult, in their adult form. And some of them are actually parasitic. So they'll latch on to another fish, and these little teeth down inside there will make their way through, and they live off the other fish just by, I guess, bodily fluids and whatnot. But to ID these guys, you count these little ribs, which are called myomeres. And you have to look it in the book to see the range of myomeres per species. But we have, I want want to say 6 different species of lamprey in West Virginia. There's a brook lamprey, there are Ohio lamprey, there's silver lamprey. There's a rare one that we only have in the Kanawha, the little Kanawha. I can't remember its common name. I can remember its scientific name. But they're fairly common, and the more we tend to improve our stream quality, the more of these we're seeing. So since we've been dumping limestone sand in the headwaters of several of our drainages to mitigate acid rain and acid snow, more lamprey and more species are kind of coming back. Gauley River was one awesome example of that. Since we started doing limestone sand work, the native species found in the Gauley River above Summersville went from like 12 to 25 in just a few years. You know, the Sculpins are coming back, and all these guys are coming back. It works. What else about fish is cool? Man, there's all kinds of things. There's something I didn't touch on yet that we should.
I'm not reading mine.
Well, I was just trying to think of that handout
I was trying to help.
thing that we had. And I think last year it was a lot of fin questions were wrong. So
Yeah, it was kind of
maybe
fin, the anatomy,
maybe emphasize it.
disease, like the PCB toxin.
Oh, so yeah, there are several toxins that we actually sample for, or we sample the fish, we send it to DEP, they sample for the toxin. That's how that works. And PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, are one of the ones that show up a lot in West Virginia because of the industry we have, you know, right along our rivers. So it's always going to be there, probably. And mercury is another one that we have some problems with, and a lot of that's atmospheric. You know, everything we burn to the west of us falls on our heads as rain here. So, but the limestone sand work we do does mitigate a lot of that. Doesn't get rid of the mercury, but doesn't allow it to stay in suspension like an acid stream would. So there's a lot of things to be aware of, and but still, I'm on the side of there are more contaminants in the fish that you can buy from Kroger than probably what you can catch in West Virginia. My favorite one to work on is our native walleye, but West Virginia is blessed with some really unique fish, and that all kind of hinges on the New River and the New River drainage, and that's where these walleye were thought to evolve. And it turns out that our walleye have the oldest genetic haplotype for the species. So the walleye of North America started in our rivers here in West Virginia. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know that.
Very neat. And we're trying to bring them back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question I have for you guys is actually a question we had on our last test that we all did very poorly on. So I'm going to ask it. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Is what is the catch limit on a trout stream that's catch and release? It's none. Our trout limit is actually 6, but on the catch and release stream, it'll be 0 is the possession limit. So I did have that question, and only 2 teams got it right. So yeah, yeah, it was a trick question that I threw in there. So make sure they read they read their questions like thoroughly. I really don't do a whole lot of trick questions, but that one I did throw in there. As for right now, you are more than welcome to stand up, walk around, ask questions about things. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff out that we didn't get to. Please take pictures. You guys can touch everything. These you can take home with you and kind of read, take to your teams. I do have an electroboard activity. We will be doing reptiles and amphibians this year as well, so that's kind of an interactive activity where you can play around. So please feel free to just see, touch, feel. There's a ton out here. So thank you.